Thank you. That was a slide, and so now I can move forward.
Yeah.
Hello everyone. Thank you for joining to hear me talk today. Today I'm going to mainly be talking about how we're using different machine learning models that are interconnected in some way over at Shopify to help tackle different retail challenges that our merchants face. So, by show of hands, how many of you have heard of Shopify before? Awesome. So this will become easier. For those of you who didn't raise your hand, we're essentially a commerce platform. We provide tools for merchants to run a commerce business successfully. We started in 2006, and we've grown to those numbers that you see now before you. Most of you would have at some point in the past purchased something from a Shopify merchant. You probably didn't know they were a Shopify merchant, right? And that is by design. So thank you for letting me run past this slide. I will say this though, the name isn't easy to pronounce. So it is pronounced Kshetrajna. Most people professionally call me K, if that's easier, and you guys want to chat with me, that's easier as well. Yeah, like you already know, I have a bunch of experience building machine learning models in retail, ad tech, and healthcare. I'm a strong believer in systems thinking, and today's talk is going to reflect a little bit on that. Although I will say that I also see the value in building hacky small things, but with the vision of getting to a larger, robust system down the line, right? So what's on our agenda today, right? I thought of taking us through a journey today, right? And this is the journey that millions of our merchants take every day with Shopify. I'm going to talk about this journey, and I will show you how we over at Shopify are using machine learning at every step of the way to try to make our merchants as successful as they can possibly be, right? So I'm going to talk about a few use cases and how these all tie together. And then finally, I'll also talk to you about how we over at Shopify, how the data scientists and ML engineers we have go from an idea that's in our head to something that's in prototype to production, and how seamless we've tried to make it, right? So where do we start, right? Let's start in the very beginning. Let's say we all decide to start an entrepreneurship journey today, and we decide to open a Shopify store. So we have this great idea of a product that we want to sell, and we're like, let me go and create a Shopify store today. Let's start there, right? So if we start there, we start with that storefront, right? Like, so I've created this nice UI. Shopify helps us create this nice UI, and we have the storefront. And so now, what next, right? Well, first thing, I'd want to manage my catalog somehow, right? I have a bunch of products. I need to manage that catalog somehow. Let's say I did that. Then I would have to go and find customers to actually buy my products. And this is one of the hardest problems in retail, right? Let's say miraculously I'm able to do that. Then comes larger problems like inventory management, right? Like I'm selling across multiple channels. Maybe I'm selling online as well as in retail. How do I manage my inventory better, right? Let's say I do that, then I have to deal with checkout and all the complexity that comes with that. Logistics and shipping, that's not easy either. We have automations. Maybe my business is really successful and I'm now looking to automate certain processes. That's not easy as well. And then finally, I have to now dread and I have to deal with fraud, and somehow I have to protect my business against fraud, right? And there's many, many, many more, right? All of this is to essentially say, running a commerce business isn't just opening a storefront, it's a lot of complexity. And at Shopify, we're trying to help our merchants at every step along this way and more, right? There's a lot of things I haven't even displayed in this slide, but Shopify wants to walk that entire journey with our merchants as much as we can, right? So I wish I could start and I could talk to you about all of those different use cases, but I do not have the time right now to do that. But we'll talk about a few, right? So we're going to start by talking about that catalog management piece, right? So I've worked on this model called product categorization. It's near and dear to me. I've worked on it for a while, and so I'm going to talk to you about how we use product categorization to solve a merchant problem. And then I'm going to talk about how we solved the second problem we saw, which was the marketing, right? So we said, hey, finding customers for our merchants is a hard problem. So I'm going to talk to you about another project that we have, another product that we have called Shopify Audiences, which actually builds on top of product categorization to say, hey, we've now solved the catalog management issue. Can we expand that to also solve the marketing issue for our merchants, right? And then finally, I'm going to talk to you about attribute extraction, right, which is the next logical step for us from product categorization. And then once we finish this entire journey, I'm going to talk to you about the underlying infrastructure and the platforms that we have at Shopify to enable all of these products that our data scientists are building. Right? So let's start in the beginning, right? So product categorization. We've started that storefront, and now I'm a merchant. I've decided what I want to sell, and I have a product, right? So what do I do now, right? Well, the first thing is, like, those are my dogs, by the way. Like, let's say I wanted to sell that dog bed, right? So I've created this product, and I want to sell this dog bed, right? One of the things that's, especially in online commerce, one of the things that's very important is the metadata around the product, right? So things like, what category is this product, right? What color is it? Maybe there are other attributes, shape, fill material, and on and on and on, right? All of these things are critical in an online commerce setting because most of us already know we filter, we search, there are regulatory requirements, even things like taxes depend on this, right? In different locations, the amount you're taxed on depends on what you're selling. Now, you could, of course, say, hey, this is a merchant's problem. They can manually input all of this information to us so that we can use it. And sure, they can, but that would just add so much more friction. Like, wouldn't it be better if we can somehow pre-populate or pre-fill some of this information, and then our merchants can just look at it once and either correct us or approve it, vis-a-vis having to fill all of this in manually. And that's where product categorization came in, right? So we wanted to try to do as much of this in using machine learning and automate all of this, right? So we start by looking at the categories themselves, right? So we used something called the Google Product Taxonomy, which is essentially a controlled list of categories that products can belong to. As the name suggests, Google created this, and we've piggybacked on top of that. The Google Product Taxonomy is essentially a hierarchical tree-based structure, right? So it has over 5,000 different nodes. These nodes can go 7 levels deep. So this is just one branch of that tree, right? So we're starting at arts and entertainment, right at the very top. And you can see how detailed it gets as we go along, right? It gets as far as clarinet care kits, right? That's a category in the taxonomy, right? And like I mentioned, there are 5,000 of these nodes in the taxonomy, and our goal is to kind of basically assign a branch or a set of nodes to each product, right? So I can say, hey, this product is a clarinet care kit, which by definition means it's all of that other parent nodes that it has inside of it, right? So this is essentially the problem statement, right? The difficulty with this is it's a great representation for products, but it makes machine learning a little bit harder, right? This isn't a flat classification problem that most of us are used to. This is a hierarchical classification problem, so it is a little bit trickier. So how did you, and before we even get into the model, right, what's the scale at which we need to do this, right? Here are some of the requirements we had, right? Historically, Shopify has had billions of products, right? And for different purposes, we need to be able to not just predict on the products that our merchants are selling today. We also need to be able to we need to predict on all of those products that our merchants have ever sold. So just there, we have billions of products. These billions of products have tens of billions of images. Each product has multiple images associated with it, so many, many, many images. And every time we train a new model, there are consumers of ours who want us to update our predictions with every new training of the model, because their downstream consumption requires updated predictions as well. So it's not just, hey, train a new model and make new predictions. No, it's train a new model and predict everything from history again, right? Furthermore, we have tens of millions of products created and updated daily. Our merchants are just creating and updating products daily. And so we have many downstream consumers for this. Just a few there, right? Search, discovery, product sync. So we allow our merchants to sync to other e-commerce channels where they can sell, where this metadata is used. Admin page, analytics, is on and on, right? And all of these use cases have different requirements. Some of them are asking us for real time, some of them say batch, some of them say streaming. So our model needs to be capable of handling all of these different use cases. Right? So let's talk about the architecture. Now, I'm not going to go deep into the actual neural network. That wasn't the point of this talk. But at a high level, after some initial experiments, we made the decision to build a model that was not task specific. And what I mean by that is our vision was to build essentially a knowledge graph, which we called the product understanding engine. The idea behind this was that similar tasks need not be learned from scratch, and we have this knowledge graph that we can reuse for similar tasks that crop up down the line, right? So we started by, first of all, deciding that this was going to be a multitask, multi-class problem. And the multitask here basically refers to each of those layers, right? So if you remember from before, we had those 7 different layers in the taxonomy. Each level of that taxonomy was treated as its own separate tasks. So if I'm selling my dog bed, the fact that it's animals and pet supplies in level 1 is a separate task, and the fact that it's a dog bed in level 3 or 4 is a separate task. Are they connected? Yes. Are they separate tasks? Also yes, right? And so each level of, like I said, each level of the taxonomy is treated as a separate task, and each task is a multi-class classification problem, right? The number of classes in each task is different. Level 1, there are fewer categories. As you go deeper, the tree starts becoming wider. And so the number of classes gets larger as you go deeper into that tree, right? And so different tasks have different number of classes. And then we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, right? Most of our features were either textual or images, and so we wanted to kind of piggyback on top of existing pre-trained models. Specifically, we used multilingual BERT for text, and we used MobileNet V2 for images, right? The choice of these models were both made after extensive testing with different models, and essentially it boiled down to a balance between performance gains and cost trade-offs, right? So we had to kind of do a balance between those things, and this is kind of where we landed. And so for inference, we wanted the model to be as modular as possible so that we could optimize for performance and compute optimizations, right? We would always start by having the raw text and the raw image of a product. That's where we start, right? This meant that we could use things like caching of the embeddings itself, right? So the most expensive part in our model is the actual embedding calculation for the text and the images. And so if we can, we want to try to reuse some of those embeddings. If I've seen that image before, do I really need to re-embed it during prediction, right? Like, not really. So what we did is we essentially saved the embedding layers as their own standalone models for inference so that we could reuse caching. And then we have the bottom part of the neural network essentially saved as an embedding to probability model. And then finally, we have business logic and what I call selecting the right prediction, right? Remember, where during training, we treated the taxonomy as different tasks. Level 1 was a different task, level 2 was a different task, and onwards. So during training, the model was hierarchy unaware. Like, it did not know parent-child relationships. And that's this last stage is where we enforce, right? So here we have business rules that say, hey, if the model predicted that it was animals and pet supplies in level 1, it cannot possibly be a drill bit in level 3, right? Like, we enforce that parent-child relationship, and that's the place where we do this. And so all of that to put together is our combined model. Now, each of those ovals that you see can be deployed individually as standalone models, or they could be deployed together as a combined model. And different use, like real time, for example, we use the entire thing because we need it as quickly as possible. Streaming and batch, we kind of deploy it separately so that we use caching in the middle to reuse some of the embedding we have from before, right? So what did we, like, we did all of this. Was it useful, right? As you will see in the next few slides, there are multiple internal applications that build on top and then build and use product classification as a more foundation building block. But even before that, we wanted to put this in front of our merchants, right? So we wanted to see if this is actually solving a merchant problem. And what we did is this is essentially our admin page. If you are a merchant and you're selling a dog bed, you will see this and you will see our prediction show up there. And the merchant now has the option of either accepting it, rejecting it, or ignoring it if they want to, right? And this essentially adds a feedback mechanism for us. If they correct our prediction, that gets used as new training data for the model. And if they accept it, great. Like, so then we know that's a positive feedback, the merchant's finding it useful, and that category gets used for things like tax calculations down the line, right? So the merchant is able to find direct impact from our predictions, and we put it so that we completed that loop, right? So we use merchant data to make predictions. We put the predictions in front of the merchant, get feedback, and then the loop is complete, right? So we did that, right? And so now we've reached the end of the first stage of that journey we took, of our merchant journey. We have our categories for our product, right? So now we have a fairly reliable and scalable way of identifying what products our merchants are selling. And so now we started looking at both indirect and direct use cases that we can build on top of this. And one of the use cases that was actually staring at us in the face was that of marketing, right? So let's say now we go back, we're that merchant now, we have our dog belt to sell. One of the, if not the hardest problems for any merchant is to find customers, right? Like you have your store, everything looks fancy. How do you actually get people to come to your store and buy? Like that is the hardest problem in commerce, right? Like to find customers. And typically the way most merchants do this is they go on advertising platforms and they kind of run digital ads to get visits to their webpage, right? But in a world of ever-changing online advertising rules, it becomes hard. Our merchants really struggle with customer acquisition. And so this is where we came up with Shopify Audiences, right? So what is Shopify Audience? It's a new way for our merchants to find high-intent buyers, right? This allows them to be more efficient with how they reach potential customers. So we believe that the power of collective is actually higher than the power of individual merchants. But we also believe that this has to be a voluntary choice that our merchants make, right? So what this means is merchants choose to become part of a collective. Like merchants literally say, hey, I want to take part in Shopify Audiences and I'm willing to work together with other merchants to help the group together. And so once they become part of this collective, we are then able to identify high intent buyers, right? Shopify merchants actually represent a very niche market. Our buyers, the buyers for our merchants, actually are some of the highest intent buyers you will find on the internet. And this is where we want to use the power of machine learning to kind of build on top of product categorization to help our merchants solve the marketing challenge, right? So without getting too much into the details of exactly how the ML works, here's how it is, right? So you as a merchant are going to join this collective, right? So you say, hey, I'm joining this group of merchants to try to help me find the right customers to advertise to. And so then you decide what product you want to actually run your advertisement for. So going back, I want to sell that dog bed. So I am going to come and say, hey, I'm joining the collective. I want to run an advertising campaign for my dog bed, right? And so now what we do is we look at that collective and we look at the buyer pool, right? The buyer pool is all of the customers who ever purchased something from all of the merchants in that collective. And we know all of those buyer histories, right? So we know everybody what they've bought, what categories they've bought. And so now essentially we have a machine learning model that comes up with an audience set, right? So this model is literally going to say something along the lines of, hey, you want to sell a dog bed. People who bought dog food are more likely to buy a dog bed than people who bought, let's say, screwdrivers, right? And so essentially we come up with a refined list of audiences whom we believe the merchant should be advertising to, and we create that audience set, and this is sent over to the ad platform, right? This is actually, so we've rolled this out for some of our Plus merchants, and we've actually seen some very good gains. Again, I'm not going to get into the exact advertising metrics, but the return over ad spend of this audience set is much higher than what they're used to. So far, we've seen how we build product classification. We've seen how that solved a specific merchant problem. We've also seen how we took that product categorization and built another use case on top of that. And so we got to thinking, right, like category is just one step of this way. Remember from the dog bed, we said category, color, shape, size, and fill material. Those other things, right, color, shape, size, those were attributes, right? And so we were like, can we also do other attributes and not just category? And that's where our attributes project came in. So again, one of the things to note about attributes is that It's a lot of the attributes that are like the lot of the attributes we're interested in, they're visual in nature. So for this particular project, we looked only at the images, not the text. And so what we identified very early on is that attributes are dependent on the category, right? So if I was selling a t-shirt, the attributes for the t-shirt are probably things like sleeve length, neck cut, and color, right? Sleeve length doesn't really make sense if you're selling a dog bed, right? The kind of attributes you have for a dog bed are very different from the kind of attributes you have for a t-shirt. So we identified early on that attributes are kind of tied to a category. So that's right there, we knew that product categorization had to be present here. And further, we also realized that we needed people, like data scientists or ML engineers aren't best equipped to come up with these attributes, right? And so we needed somebody else who could tell us what these attributes should be and what those attribute relationships to product categories should be. And this is where domain experts came in, right? So we essentially start by taking a product category. Our domain experts will then tell us, hey, for this category, these are the attributes that are correct. And for each of these attributes, this is the list of possible values there can be. They then send this over to, they create like a data set, send it over to annotators who create high quality data sets for us. And that's where we come in, and then we take that training data and we build machine learning models on top of that. You can actually see a demo of this right there on the left-hand side for you. And so this is how our attributes project worked. And you can immediately see use cases of this. This gets used in search, it gets used in filtering, it gets used in multiple, like basically anywhere product classification gets used, this can be used. It will just enhance the capabilities of it, right? And we have actually a lot of commonalities between product classification and our attribute project, right? One of the hardest things we had to do when we built product classification was that image download pipeline. I said we have tens of billions of images. It's hard to move that many images around, right? It's a very, very hard problem to solve. So we essentially had to build some sort of cost-efficient image download pipeline. The attribute extraction model just piggybacked on top of that. Further, the embeddings that we were using for product categorization, that could be reused for attribute extraction as well, the image embedding specifically. And then finally, like I said, product categories are just a prerequisite in order to do attributes, right? So this is how those two models are actually very tied to each other. And so that brings me to an end to the merchant journey we took, right? So we built these three different models. All of these were built, I think, over the last year or so, right? How did we actually do so much in a year? It's actually thanks to our infrastructure. And so I want to kind of briefly touch upon the platform and the tooling we have over at Shopify that enabled us to do this. I think the easiest way to discuss this is to give a very high-level overview of our data infrastructure, right?
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I think the time has run out.
Okay.
It was very interesting. I would go on. I think